There's no shortage of alleged knife defense techniques, both online and in various training places. Having personally been introduced to Aikido's knife defense techniques, and only later learning how far it is from the actual reality of knife defense, I personally know very well how many of presented knife defense techniques suffer from the same lack of realism. Unfortunately, as the common practitioner does not know what to look for in understanding whether the presented knife defense technique is realistic or not, many are taught something that would never work in a real defense situation, and thus face a life-threatening danger if they will ever face a real knife defense situation while having false knowledge about how it really works. For this reason, I interviewed Bruno Orozco, a self-defense expert who has not been satisfied with just nice-looking knife defense techniques and really looked into how knife defense actually works. Hi, my name is Rokas, and in this martial arts journey video, we will look at the reality of knife defense. When talking about knife defense, first of all, it is important to establish that the best knife defense is to run away. As Bruno Orozco says, the knife is a very simple and complex weapon at the same time. Simple because anyone can grab a knife and hurt you, and complex because a knife doesn't have patterns. It's too fast and too chaotic. It's a weapon that's practically impossible to stop if someone with a true focus to kill is holding it. To elaborate on Bruno's thought, it is only a myth that it's possible to rely on a single or few techniques to defend yourself against the real knife attack. A knife is such a difficult weapon to defend against that if you ever come across such a situation and you have a chance to run, there should be no consideration in trusting your presumed superior knife defense techniques trying to disarm the attacker just because of your confidence in what you learned. No unnecessary risk should be taken in such a situation, and if you can run away, you should run away. Effective knife defense question though becomes important if you are in a situation when there is no option to run away, such as when protecting a loved one or having no escape route. This is where, according to Bruno Orozco, we need to understand how knife and weapon attacks work. Bruno points out that there are three categories in weapons and knife defense. First is the part of a threat, when you are shown a weapon and are threatened, but they don't touch you with a weapon. They just show it. A mugging is when you are touched by a weapon, but you are not attacked by it. And finally, we have the attack when you are physically attacked by the weapon. To elaborate once more on what Bruno said, it's important to understand that if you are presented with a weapon, that is not yet an actual attack, and there is still space for either a preemptive attack, negotiation, or simply giving your valuables to the mugger if that guarantees safety. A much more difficult situation is if the person with the knife is actually attacking. Here, Bruno continues. In that case, the best thing to do is to establish distance. We must not go to deliberately try to stop and try to hold the knife, because this is impossible if the knife is in motion. The knife has a sort of come and go, bouncing back and forth, really fast motion. So the only thing we can do, if we cannot establish distance, is to reduce the damage that the knife will inflict upon us. Only reduce and not eliminate, because it's impossible to come out unharmed from a real knife attack. I personally found this point brought up by Bruno Orozco fascinating. All the knife defense techniques that I was introduced to prior to this interview were showing clean techniques against a single thrust, where as a performer of the technique, I would supposedly get out unharmed during my training. Only later I realized that having this expectation of performing a clean, single technique can prove to be fatal, since as soon as this clean technique would not work in reality once, the brain could easily freeze and presume failure and would be unable to effectively defend further. Expecting from the very beginning that the knife will most likely inflict damage may very well give the required mental fortitude to continue on defending, even if the technique is not landing clean and damage is done. As Bruno says, the real question is not on how to avoid damage altogether, but how to reduce it. To reduce the damage, we have to know the techniques where we don't allow the knife to harm us or cut us in vital areas of our body, because if we end up unconscious because of lack of blood, we will not be able to defend ourselves. As Bruno explains, these vital areas can be described as horizontal lines. As you move down from the top of the head, the vital lines and non-vital lines switch in between. While the forehead is not a vital line in itself, it is important to know that if it is cut, a curtain of blood will spill into our eyes, making it unable for us to see, and that can lead to deadly results. If the line across our eyes is cut, we may lose our sight altogether due to direct eye damage. The next line across the level of the mouth and chin is not as vital, yet the following line of the neck is. As we move further down, our chest is protected by chest muscles and ribcage, making it almost as a natural armor and thus non-vital. Yet the next level down is vital again, as it includes our liver and pancreas and little protection. Even lower, we have our intestines, where if someone stabs, it's less serious, yet if someone slashes with enough power, the intestines will pop out, and to quote Bruno, you will be too preoccupied to pick them up and not defending yourself. To move our attention to the arms, Bruno explains that the interior part of them have veins, while the external part doesn't. Thus, if a person ends up defending against a knife with his external parts of the arms, it will cause less serious damage. Meanwhile, if an artery or a vein is reached in the internal side of the arms, it's less than a minute until a person will pass out. While there will be a chance to continue to fight during that time, one will slowly start to feel ill and eventually end up unconscious. In the end, Bruno explains that in a knife attack we have to protect the mentioned vital areas and be willing to sacrifice the non-vital ones, while remembering that there are actually no clean techniques against a knife. While considering that running away is not an option in some cases, and knowing the difference between vital and non-vital areas, the last question that remains is how to actually train for a real knife attack and how to really defend from it. Bruno answers that when you focus on reducing damage, the next step is to counterattack. The best counterattack technique is a combination of striking and grappling. Grappling not as if you take the opponent to the floor, but grappling as a movement of leverage, as in wrist locks and finger locks. Bruno points out that here Aikido knife defense techniques can actually come in useful, as they include wrist locks and finger locks against the knife attacker. Yet he also stresses that it's not just the techniques themselves which matter, but also the training method. These techniques work if they are adapted to the reality of the knife. And the only way to do this is to do sparring with a training knife. Because if you don't know how someone is actually going to attack you in a training session and under pressure, then you will never know what combination of striking and locks to apply. As we came to the end of the discussion about the knife, Bruno wanted to point out one more last thing by saying, most knife attacks are ambushes, so the victim does not see the knife until he or she feels it in the body, unless it's a case of a threat for your distance, where you can use that distance to be able to run away. But if the aggressor is closing the distance and you cannot run away, then you have to fight for your life, understanding that you will be hurt, but with appropriate techniques, you can come out alive. And that's the reality of the knife. As you see from this talk, the reality of knife defense is far from how most self-defense systems introduce it. Clean, specific techniques where the defender comes out unharmed. If we want to raise our chances of surviving a real knife attack, we have to be willing to face the reality of it by being ready for it both physically while doing proper pressure intensity training and also mentally, considering all possible options in order to raise our chances of coming out alive. As in most freelancers, there's no easy, quick solution for this life-threatening scenario, and we must face the reality of it in our training, rather than have our fantasies shattered in a life or death scenario if such a time comes.